so don't say shady shit. Addy, can you just make sure it's like if it turns off or on?
How am I supposed to know if it turns off or on?
Well, just check it like after like 15 minutes when you
Okay.
during that time.
Does it look like when it's recording? Okay, sounds good.
Cool.
Alright.
If you don't get it, I was saying we'll get kicked. Actually, for me. No, I mean, if you don't get something, you'll have to still always do it. I don't know what it does. It's like 6 months away. It's 6 months.
Or debating about college football.
Come on. Wait, I'm gonna go.
Is he leaving or is he going?
Those are grounds.
Speech drop is on.
Okay, I'm good with it.
I'm gonna need a second.
I'm good.
Rhys, are you
Mm-hmm.
look at me like you're not.
No, I'm still good.
Recording. Alright, now I'm good.
Climate justice requires the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to implement open borders for member states. The plan solves labor migration flows, boosting economic integration. That's going on ICC. The Southeast Asian countries want to make the continent more organic, more fighting for the inclusion of the pan-regional economy. They should tell the community people most of the gender rules of the people move freely cross borders without passport checks. Rules on the regulation cross border change very little. Even the companies the region utilizing resources, multinationals, integrated dynamic ways. The company wants to relocate another legally destination countries rules of visa immigration labor office and the way to connect people is the key to just in the ASEAN. Advantage one is centrality. Complex restrictions on migration limits labor mobility between ASEAN states, limits to regional labor markets in 2016. ASEAN economic unity and city transfer watching to region with a framework of goods and services skills, labor and habit from skilled labor, has been lack of communities, regional farming, different protections, policies, good building, political strategies, and PDs, labor movement, PDs, and still not uniform, making it easier to hire from another ASEAN state member states, regional labor policies, labor shortages in the Philippines, and Indonesia, Vietnam, they get better from labor from other ASEAN states, atomic balance, and work for both the regional business sectors, both work for the connectivity companies, hire foreign workers, and those that are hiring from ASEAN, based on the savings and work for American procedures, and mobility is necessary for ASEAN development, fills in the last gap in economic integration, that's CQ1 to 1.19. Inter-ASEAN labor mobility largely taking place under volume has grown to major plans does not change. Issue with the ASEAN economic community, new challenges to achieve competitive, innovative, dynamic economy, or substantially prevent productivity and efficiency and innovation. Individual workforce essential priority demand to attract, retain, circulate talent, resource need, good high school age demand for low skill work and increase demand, earning to source scarcity, maybe more key economic senior population for labor shortage. Business and essentially achieve trade linkage, systemic strive for promote more mobility, strengthen the benefit of both source and destination economies, and integrated economic community is necessary for ASEAN centrality and leadership. That's Del 14. ASEAN is a bulwark of regional stability, increasing prosperity, and pivotal in the whole Asian region and summit. Regional leadership, ASEAN constantly moving towards ACE. This equals no longer but began as a security integrated economic group, economic development, high priority, economic transformation will be there. Only through more deeply integrated economic integration, practice prosperity, ASEAN holds a key to broader regional political cooperation. And changing security government and security environment puts centrality on edge. Reform commitments to coherence and integration check back as launched by 12A. Challenge facing ASEAN is the challenge and change strategic environment market by China. U.S. advocation and important of the U.S. and China. But agriculture, South Asia, the frontline vertebrates, regional allies, all member states, religious statement of treaty purpose of engagement, acknowledge, driven by investment connectivity, vast architecture, renewed emphasis on insurance continued relevance, and ASEAN centrality key spill over broader multilateralism now is key. That's Zerma 120. ASEAN regional organization potential to running the outbreak has centrality. It is usually solidarity, important for the collaboration, information, crucial governments, and available information exchange is needed. ASEAN is really central from others, mass collaboration, collaborating among ASEAN as far as international cooperation with a lot of discourse and global level. ASEAN could be role model. Life regional multilateralism and this belief in the even increasing ASEAN could be created to diverse risk close and activity, especially in the global health crisis. Centrality of ASEAN, remember and understand is urgently needed, and multilateralism is an impactful threat to central threats. That's the letter 21. The world is facing a pivotal movement with lead to breakdown of the border pressure, currency, beyond COVID time, biodiversity, creation, technology, without guardrails, and nuclear war, climate breakdown, further which would remember any other new country getting involved with alone when it is affecting multiple battles during the global governance many crises, research nuclear wars, never, and autonomous weapons, and strong ASEAN solves Asian war. That's Mamabani 17. Australia's properties and prosperity of the region, Axis critical knowledge, China's peace, rise, delivering laboratory, peaceful, visibility, quantities, Austria, created indispensable amount of profit, quantities, super powers, talk about rise, Asia provides a basic platform, generate ecosystem peace, and moderate aggressive impulses, and Asian war escalates at ways that's Gaddy 17. Asia is the most militarized region in the world, seven largest military all in Asia, has 6 nuclear power, profound edge lurk behind increasing militarization, territorial disputes, lack of regional security structure, military forces, Asian policy, making world use military force, real habitat, calculation of use military rank, military economic clash will lead to a scholarship war, and advantage 2 is irregular migration. Irregular migration supports transnational organized crime groups, border controls of the root causes, one heart of 1. Limitations of legal migration that people illegal ways to migrate from the services offered by maritime organizations, thousands of Asia is migrant traffic connections, drug trafficking organizations, news policy, media market opportunities, criminal activity, Asian organized crime groups, Asian transportation, compensation for people, narcotic organizations, plan exploitation, labor markets organization, exposure, CPC differences, and plan the rules, border controls, every country's migrants, and traffickers, because no legal avenue to escape into all conditions, illegal search trafficking organization, provide travel documents, stealing from one country to another, service out transnational trafficking, including rely fraud in the documents regarding criminal activity, ability to migrate from possession, documentation, verification, in the Asian Pacific link, corruption, government, law enforcement, border control, and customs, trafficking, concerned about migrant regulations, and its reverse causal to strict border control forces migrants in the hands of third-party syndicates and constitutes a major revenue flow. That's Miller and Baumeister 13. Power forces and people migrate shows will never succeed in attempting to control migration, restrict migration, deep demand for clandestine migration, linked to the widening borders of those migrants. Yet the sort of third-party national organization, Asian facility, by third-party, perform migrations tend to be slower and more expensive. The migration industry continues to grow migrants, abuse, exploitation, trafficking, restricted borders will call the solution. And migrant smuggling funds, organized crime, and terrorism. That's FATF 22. Migrant smuggling generates significant quantity of criminal average trafficking and demand for smuggling service prices attracted excess of USD 10 billion. Migrant smugglers launch receipts and third parties launch other migrants pay smuggling clash of methods including superficial assets are being used in the criminal activity. Migrant smuggling criminals increasing outsourcing mining flows across border delinquency, terror financing, and migrant smuggling response to groups that may facilitate smuggling migrants. And Southeast Asian organized crime puts money into the hands of terrorist groups. Organized crime sustains the drug trade. That's Subterm Franco 18. The crime terrorists and knives in South Asian groups such as GING, ACG, criminals with SAG, include terrorist behavior, linkage to violent extremist organization, criminal organization, includes one triangle wars, like large opium producing region, opium trading inside of the industrial production, synthetic narcotics, Southeast Asian terrorist organization, all state machine, lots of profit, measure organized crime, sympathetic interaction between criminal and terrorism, prison opportunity, illicit actors, child with community affiliation between terrorist groups and similar relationship, maritime South Asian, terrorist crimes linked to weapons, laws, and security, the sufficient cycle that allows them to contribute to criminal and terrorist activity, and drug profits get funneled into insurgents in Northeast India. That's scene 20. Crime dominating the Northeast Asian region, crafting, Damien, front of marijuana, public growing, common underground, trafficking, drug classes, group these effects, trying to finance and also show helping military structure along the borders of the global triangle, international trade connection between insurgent drug trafficking and India, North India, insurgent groups of the black markets supply weapon groups, not results like the church, like they would not sustain the crowd, cooking trade, space shows, revenue, control, drug content, international, organized support of arms and militias, partly difficult to push target trafficking, anti-production, public trade, after circumstances, regulation, acting, purchasing, narcotic trafficking, weapons, surgery, trench challenges, and security force, anti-security, separation, these drug mafia, with blood clutch, threats, maybe adversely fight trafficking against regulatory transporter Jews. It was difficult to negotiate with or control, and Al Qaeda joins forces with North Indian insurgents that goes nuclear. That's Al Qaeda L20. Al Qaeda's protection strategy and these anti-terrorist groups be one day credit global nuclear deterrent new terrorism, new communication command, set up bad for non-established government terrorists trying to far aware of nuclear facilities, right in nuclear blocks that tracks Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda should have the insurgent works operating in North India in attacks on nuclear facility, giving plan execute terrorists used to spread nuclear radiation. Pakistan holds 2001 to the attacks in Poland on the Pakistan election, conflict terrorism, and demilitarization conventional force.
Cut the Ahmed evidence at conventional force.
Okay. Cool. For Krauss?
Yeah.
Okay. First, the irregular migration evidence advantage. The shown hard evidence is from 2001. Why hasn't organized crime like Toulouse?
Well, this is not a uniqueness argument. The slow and hard evidence is explaining the link between migration and crime groups. I think like the warrants would still apply.
Okay, so we know crime groups have been around and thriving since 2001. Why have they done nothing?
We have made a unique claim as to why right now drug profits are funneling insurgents in Northeast India, which makes it more likely that they try and pursue nuclear terrorism. I don't think it's like a linear thing.
Okay,
more
so
money,
organized
more
crime has always been high, but only now there are opportunities for it to go nuclear.
Well, yeah, we made like a uniqueness claim about an impact scenario with recent evidence about like how the money and like funding
Okay,
right now
sure.
causes.
This like migrant, this I think it's the, yeah, some John Franco evidence. Where does this card mention Myanmar terrorists? Because that's the specific scenario in the Singh evidence.
Wait, sorry. Say it again.
Your Singh evidence is about the Indo-Myanmar frontier. What terrorist groups or organized crime groups are in Myanmar specifically? Does the Sumter and Franco evidence talk about them?
Wait. The some-term evidence is in the context of Southeast Asia. Myanmar is in Southeast Asia. Like it's talking about terrorist organizations like within the region.
I know.
Like I'll be honest. Like I don't know the names of like the specific terror organizations. Our impact scenarios about like the drug profits.
Because the only ones that it mentioned are operating in the Philippines. Like it says
that's like largely irrelevant. The internal link evidence right here talks or like that you just like talked about is about broader crime and terror within Southeast Asia. Like one internal link evidence talking about Myanmar doesn't really like answer like the question of broader drugs.
The first advantage, the Dermone evidence you tagged it as ASEAN centrality, key to spill over to broader multilat. Where does the card say that ASEAN gets modeled in any like sort of global sense?
What do you mean, like other multilateral organizations model?
Yeah.
We don't make a claim about other.
Okay, then how do you spill over globally?
We think that ASEAN would be a global multilateral institution.
Okay,
we
so like a union of a bunch of
countries
countries, like poor countries in Southeast
That's
Asia is
literally
gonna like set the rules on like how the U.S. should behave.
That is our argument. Our argument is that right now they're perceived as ineffective. They aren't interrated economically. The plan would change that and boost their perception internationally. Like your argument right now that they're like poor countries not perceived is our act.
So like just so I'm like 100% crystal. To win your argument, you have to prove that ASEAN is able to like make the U.S. follow its rules.
I want to point to me like a line in any impact evidence about the United States falling onto the ASEAN. Like just explain to me like. Why
I mean, your impact card is about global multilateral.
Yeah. Why does this mean that like ASEAN is not able to influence like any other? Like I'm confused.
14 minutes left. When is he sent or sending? 3 off case. Case is advantage 1, advantage 2.
I'm good.
Good. First on interpretation, own borders of free and unlimited immigration with salient controversy in the literature and distinct from the one I see daily 13. Own borders are first on unlimited free immigration. There are arguments for the immigration side. Immigration is a human right. It is unconditional and a violation of the content of Schengen style policy. There is on our open borders with the reversible, conditional, and limited participating states. Schengen BC and 22. Schengen countries extend border control setting secondary movements, terrorist threats, terror bans, extended border controls, Austria, Hungary, and Slovenia, terrorists and organized crime, all except for long border checks, court policies, borders illegal, and voting if one limit state allowed an unlimited number of bilateral, regional, and multilateral affirmatives, burdens, and negative dodges, core generics, 2 ground. Every negative generic is 2 fully open borders, anything else, dudes, negative dealings, everything, competing into strikes, set a model of debate for the next 6 months, creates more substance in the long run, even if it costs substance, in the short run, and reusability is arbitrary, second off. Justice and Counterplan takes justice and necessitates the Association of Southeast Asian Nations implement open borders for member states with the exception of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar. Myanmar is a disaster for ASEAN credibility. 22. Rigorous struggle to produce a unified front ASEAN response to Ukraine's war condemned Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, the China isolate itself to claim the invasion justified ASEAN countries expelling Myanmar and Africa over means a major embarrassment removal would also cause them admitting to lead that compatible ability to speak honestly and publicly dramatically reshape the region, leaving ASEAN to focus as well as turning block on an area in which the Europe is performing well. And Burma's military coup is losing steam. Marseille 1-2. Entity authorized support for society in Myanmar provides assistance to resistance authorized funding by the administration movement to resistance for money for higher education, healthcare, message growth by Russia, China, due to losing support China and Russia, that support regime. Happy to work with NLD, no evidence should will stabilize or gain public support united from Russian military power. And specifically, Thailand supported hundreds of thousands of migrants back. The economist 413. Burmese refugees in Army ordering back to destroy camps holding delivery of food, water, medicine, supplies used to dealing with refugees on unwanted guests, not allow a resettle policy to return Burmese refugees in Myanmar very common. And constricted migration policy has called an exodus of citizens in Myanmar. Now 21. Myanmar citizens trying to travel abroad were prevented new restrictions. The OWIC Asia passport turned away for creating new laws. OWIC introduced never enforcement, never issued cards or even heard of them to tied own rules could be complimented Myanmar workers. And that causes brain drain that's only been prevented by strict laws and illegal migration. It fails because Burmese brokers scam Frontier 920. Inflation contributing to exit this constant bid gives a balloon disasters policy risk $D trigger deaths following a person class of carriers remain judges establishing multiple checks citizens work identification card authorities allowing at least certain types of migrant workers across women's camp diary distributed for especially with the cascade women Limburger election small rural estate period around 10 million to economic crisis countries. Latest brain drain and brain drain wrecks the economies and causes failed states. War 17. Give small countries lack capabilities necessary to retain talent on a pressing medium. Not countries current human capital earth and immigration further with this weak institutions preserving the state of the human capital institutions that goal in externality skilled immigration rewards them and class trust and great powers and triggers multiple scenarios for escalation career because 17. Myanmar 2 great power neighbors fortified borders carrying a military efforts in Myanmar collapses trigger large scale destabilization and from China and India with states that might have been vetted Sierra security development great powers within the chance of the class use and allies launched Harker military campaign assisting Indian forces to execute a trilateral highway for the US to deploy military forces on China's doorstep and conduct to drop the argument one proportionally punishment of losing the battle is worse than skill which solves by the investment in the original argument and defending dropped the argument over punishment is bad and over punishment has condos go for real world policy and glasses to refine the plan by considering and keeping competitive options. Third off, interpretation that freedom may only garner offense from resolve just requires open borders for human migration violation of the plan guards the offense through the implementation of open borders by ASEAN standards. One ground after infinite ground after the implementation of open borders when this topic is about the effects of open borders. They could have the UN do the auction of opening borders and then UN legitimacy good or a private corporation be contracted to open borders and then that profits are good, which is the topic. Drop the debate on two most logical no RB has encouraged theory based case. On the centrality advantage, Sheldon say first, the one I see Koreanagi evidence is companies whining about not being able to relocate employees, which is not the economic integration that boosts ASEAN leadership. Also, labor regulations is an all cause inserted in blue. ASEAN is toothless for security concerns and there are structural limits on its utility. Mod 22. ASEAN is headline among great power rallying control with disaggregating order, economic headwinds struggling to find effective responses to security, internationalism, sort of being influence computational relations, and Ukraine challenge ASEAN's ability to demonstrate agency rather than not allowing US alliances and products. And as a consist to wind back, Myanmar has failed to assimilate investors are behind and now will never be completely united in sufficient command attention changes. Slowly, religious relative to abandon while China pushes ASEAN and we should lose large red. Start to keep economic issues at the forefront rather than security wasn't built to manage great power competition. Skip the next two cards for now. Asia war. There's no war for Asia war coming, and their ASEAN solves evidence is descriptive of the status quo, which means it solves the Mahubani evidence also says China is, or skip that. Internal link is that ASEAN is a diplomatic platform for great powers to talk, which doesn't rely on the alliance, nor is it unique. The UN, EU, NATO all check, and expanded ASEAN leadership gives China diplomatic cover to Chinese maritime revisionism, the only 20. Which makes Southeast Asian nations and modern nations remain settling that these continue Chinese violation ASEAN sees who go out of China away from international law, China, Chinese actions, de facto seizure of SES is occurring stations, negotiations, dragging on. There's little support given to American and Japanese acts to reform like illegal right of free passage. And maritime revision in the SES establishes the playbook for global revisionism, the collapse of the liberal order, blank 17. In the SES, China has been making claims to running the Jash line, the Assembly China continues, China and Russia continue unconditional China divides neighbors, the United SES, Russia follows suit and invoke China's favor as president, Russia could divide the UN ASEAN, the neighbors can consolidate control like a big the president for China and Asian seas, and deterrence failures in the SES trigger nuclear war, Hanlan and polling 20. China's challenge with the balance in the Pacific Atlantic since proudly inside control over the SES use. China has been less successful in preventing China from robbing the Philippines or beyond West Assume the status quo state elevation continues to test resolve, provoking low level crisis which easily escalate trigger response to the spiral war games since simulations like the ASEAN the experts of Chinese fait accompli except that focus on the bringing China and the US to nuclear war, the multilateral advantage. The impact cards about multilateral in general make them prove that ASEAN is uniquely equipped to solve, and ASEAN multilateralism also doesn't spill over. It's a coalition of weak lower income states. The G20, G7, EU, and UN are all more determinative, global faith institutions. The German one evidence is power taking emphasis global modeling for ASEAN. The existential direct card is a laundry list with no explanation that solves all the problems are collective action problems that are impossible to solve because every state has incidents to deviate. And it's answered by the ASEAN stuck stuff. Climate change is good. Emissions prevent ice age extinction. White House 12. Return device with the biggest assassination because of ice age good. Return could be with a negative like GHG for small form canonic glaciation GHG starve. Return device and save carbon dioxide may extend the interglacial to levels small ice age would render food growing inoperably to extinction. The irregular migration advantage. The impact should have already happened. The link evidence is from 20 years ago. The app also doesn't solve smuggling, it just legalizes that goods that are still smuggled to form fund okra. And alternative revenue sources. No F says that smuggling is key to profits, just that they generate some inserted in blue. Their internal link is Myanmar specifically. It says that Myanmar would have to cooperate with North India terror groups, but they can't list any groups in Myanmar, and their card only lists terror groups in the Philippines. Operations also fail, inserted in blue. They also didn't get to a nuclear war scenario. It just says that Al-Qaeda might cooperate, but doesn't say that India would retaliate or any of the nuclear war stuff the cards marked too early. There also says India goes first, counterfirst to least Pakistan's arsenal clear. In 19, India counterfirst to considerable resources, academic response to delivery systems, surveillance, platform, and missile defense statements by officials arguing counterfirst are advantageous ability to stop Pakistan policymakers to try to do a hard trade Pakistan would lead to the terror arsenal, which would encourage any trade comparatively negotiating to doctrine and say eliminating Pakistan's weapons would be tempting for anyone would be able to wage or whatever, and first by eliminating the nuclear threat. Skip the next two cards, go back to ASEAN. Tons of all causes to ASEAN strength, Chiang 22. Hazard counter describing geopolitical changes, supply chains, food, energy, security concerns, mounting wet headwinds, determining geopolitical changes, economic fragmentation, climate crisis. It's a great power world. ASEAN is useless figure 2022. Challenging empire, Asian one and wants to impact some of the pertinent national alternative competition against this limited ability to inject substance. Okay. Tab 22 marked at inject substance.
Wait, are you?
Yeah.
Status.
Sorry?
Status.
Conditional.
Okay, the extra T shell, the violation of confused with part of the plan, fiats, like Asian, or like offense via the Asian.
You have ASEAN implement open borders.
So like the violation is just like if you include any country in the plan text, that counts as extra offense.
No, you could have read justice requires open borders in ASEAN, but you can't have them implement.
Wait, the plan text says that as the ASEAN member states have open borders between one another, how would it have to be in the ASEAN if that's not a country? Like the ASEAN is not a region.
You're right. In ASEAN member states.
That's literally the plan. It says between
No,
ASEAN
okay,
member states.
the violation is the word implement. You're having them taking an
Implement's
action.
not a word in the plan.
I'm staring at the plan right now.
Okay, sure. Whatever. The second off, or actually the first off, the violation, Schengen style, the plan, once again, does not say the word Schengen style visa. What is the violation?
The solvency advocate advocates.
Okay, so it's like a violation based off of like one line in solvency advocate. Why is that a good model debate?
This is your solvency advocate.
So like
It's not
the
one line.
solvency advocate says some type of Schengen style. What does that mean? Like the literal entirety of the plan is.
You read a card that is like showing how your plan will work. Your
let's just
plan
like-
says ASEAN should do Schengen
Okay,
style.
like our smuggling evidence says that like we should bomb Iran. Does that mean that the 1SC plan text also thinks that we should bomb?
I mean,
Iran?
I think there's like a pretty clear distinction
Why?
when it comes to
Why?
your solvency advocate. The card you put right under your plan.
So it's just like about the cards like place in the dock. So like if it's
Come on,
too
that's-
far up,
come on, like,
if
that's
it's too
reductive.
far up, then it's not a
Like
violation.
that's obviously reductive.
But
You-
where have we said that the 1SC plan is modeled exactly like the solvency advocate?
Okay, what is the point of the Korean on the evidence then?
Well, it's a normal means claim. We said that normal means would have.
So normal means is Schengen style.
Wait,
right?
so topicality should be based off of normal means implementation? That's
You just told me what
I'm
normal
asking
means
you.
is.
I'm asking you to explain why your interpret topicality is good. Should topicality be based off of normal means implementation?
Yes, because you told me
Okay.
that the card is there because it shows what normal means is.
Yeah.
I don't know what the point
I'm trying to get. What
I don't know what the point of
interpretation is.
including normal means is if you're
Well,
gonna
it
say
seems
that
like a
it's
pretty
not.
bad interpretation of topicality. If ask could lose to topicality because some part of normal means is slightly topical, but whatever. The counterplan set the text is implement open borders for member states. If it's for member states, how would this allow for migration between countries?
I do not know that.
Okay, so like the counterplan text says implement open borders for like the member states. How would the counterplan text allow for migration between like people within like each individual region if it's only for the member states? Like you haven't like the counterplan doesn't say like between countries.
If each member state has open borders, that means that anybody can migrate
The
between them.
brain drain internal, can you explain?
The argument is that right now, like Myanmar has this huge like crisis. People are fleeing the country in like hundreds of thousands because it sucks there, and it like causes brain drain.
Is it 5 minutes for
I've been here for the whole tournament.
or some rounds of
Up
that?
to you two.
Can we do 5?
Sure. All right.
ASEAN advantage, or the centrality advantage, then the migration advantage, then T, open borders, then the Myanmar pick, then extra T. There you go. The centrality advantage, the migration advantage, T, open borders, the Myanmar pick, then extra T.
I'm good.
Okay, Rhys, you?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm good.
ASEAN labor mobility is limited due to high restrictions and cost of travel. Diverse countries in the ASEAN, China, hire from Southeast Asian countries to improve labor mobility, integrates ASEAN as a collective regional economy, with all centrality and leadership. Regional governance runs hotspot escalation in Asia that escalates due to the South Asian government storm test regional models, which integrate its global multilateralism and it's also a multitude of existential risks. 1 to 1, rising China, increased aggression. 1 to see Bonpier says China doesn't care about the ASEAN because it is incredible. 1 to see 2 and 3 uniqueness as we push back ASEAN nations are co-opted by China. The plan increases strength of the institution like for successful restraint. 1 to see 4 says global multilateral is failing. ASEAN fills the role. We don't need to win a modeling claim if the ASEAN is itself strong. Plus we haven't read any internals about every single country ever following on, just that it's strong enough to signal a global credibility about moving away from potentially dangerous conflicts. 1 to 5, the conversion of different threats makes extinction likely. Nuclear war plus climate change would be pretty bad, and war may cause extinction. That's grade 18. Climate change, fresh water acidification, post-extinction risk because of how some people are connected to water shortage, great conflict, double clean water is essential for human survival. Humans have adapted to history, however, essentially interesting accidental represent challenges linear operate without multi-factor force, not become more frequent. Natural power, continuing action, humanity operate produce ecologically dependent runaway climate change, where death as essential risk, and there will never be an ice age that stands in 07. Otherwise, will never occur. All humans go to humans and have control of global climate. That should be the block to cover, even if it can be read in the temple of CFC's migration. Not going for it. Concede that there isn't any impact to nuclear proliferation. It wasn't read in the 1 to see. None of the terms have uniqueness. We'll concede that it's been happening for years. Plus, Myanmar doesn't have any successful terrorist groups, which means there's no internal link. T. Read the plan, we don't enforce Schengen, we get new responses to new violation arguments, topicality based on normal means is a terrible model debates, is the negative contest and define AF implementation as wildly untopical things like open borders means harsh restrictions, causing AF auto losses. Open borders within ASEAN are completely open to free movement between countries, counter interpretation, Schengen, self-easy free travel within already existing regional groupings is open border, that's SIU 10. EU borders are completely open, Schengen agreement, no passports, no order inspections are required anymore. Topic education, Schengen is core of the topic, not allowing it shifts away from the core of regional free movements is the only example of open borders. Topic it outweighs the only debate for 2 months. AF ground, no solved diabetes exists for countries that has completely open borders, their model clause AF to lose it to infinite picks out of countries restrictions, no AF has a solved deficit, the Swaziland pick outweighs for disability, one air camera covers the boost 600 the 1 to see and quantifiability costs a meaningful time skew. Myanmar pick. Primitive both from the counterplan, it's plan plus since it includes all the words of the plan. Counterplans must be both functionally and textually competitive. Key to force germaneness, a function only causes plan plus counterplans that move the entirety of the affirmative, like penny plus, but textual only causes scrambled words and permanent views. Counterplan clauses open borders. Remember, states not between. That means only the countries themselves, i.e., the institution gets to move between countries. Can't solve credibility since it does not have integration between economic states, including Myanmar. Is perceived as restrictions that prevent international perception, even if it solves literal integration. Multilateral evidence is about perception globally, and the China internal link is about the perception of strength. The counterplan causes backlash. Fractures unity says no. Under 01028, Minerals Government Award of Southeast Asia, there's a negative implication, military point ministers and the Myanmar not actively because of self attendance in Myanmar, and the counterplan violates a non-interference model that directs the ASEAN leadership. That's way 21. A better understanding ASEAN will dedicate reason accuracy about response that Myanmar have been misplaced. ASEAN was formed with the aim of reconciliating relations and consolidating building platform corpus to make ASEAN unique to intervention in international affairs because they're crucial in sustaining the organization. While ASEAN has been accused of being powerless by these principles have been the rights of keeping all its members and ensure the cohesion line. The interference on interference and such things tended to keep the regional stability group is not the first Thailand and talk pressure against Myanmar, shutting extracting accusations, double standards, and brain circulation, not brain drain. That's Manu 18. Negative effects of brain drain may be retention of brain circulation. Dr. Project train and Africa were practicing in the US by over 50% train outside the growth question. Not showing evidence. Africa said there's a brain and have a positive impact on basic capital formation, increasing reserve to education, encouraging current non-Americans to invest more in education, holding classical immigration rates, 5% increase in the human capital formation of the local population, and the net benefit slums. Advantage 2 says that informal migration and illegal migration is happening a lot, which plumps the impact of brain drain, even if we didn't go for the impact. It still proves that migration is inevitable, and they don't have a uniqueness for the internal. T extra, it can place the effect of the plan versus the mandate. The fiat open borders, not ASEAN credibility. We have read internals about why that spills down. We have not read a specific violation argument, which also means to get new responses. If their interpretation is just that including implementation for any specific country is bad, then all of our answers to T open borders apply because it would exclude every affirmative that specifies a specific regional subgroup, because those would all force that subgroup to implement open borders. They know a case list of what the topical asks look like under their interpretation. We made that affirmative winning is impossible, and we get neutral responses, counter interpretation. We get what we did. Anything else friends asked, since they garner offense off of impact scenarios versus regional subgroups, and their interpretation is low limits to infinite on number of affirmatives because no app could have a regional implementation. It would have to be each individual country, which is worse.
Okay, 5 minutes to prep. Any reasons to reject debate? No. Okay. All cards were red, right? Or was Manning not?
Let me see. I didn't read the chess and the evidence on the case page.
Okay. And everything else read?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't catch the thumbs, like brain, something thumbs brain drain.
Advantage 2 says illegal migration is happening now in high. That proves that like people are still moving between countries.
Okay,
It's
gotcha.
just happening legally, no uniqueness.
Gotcha.
The counterplan, it solves the entire case, but if it doesn't, then the event that swamps any solvency deficit, does every country in ASEAN other than Myanmar open their borders, which solves all of their advantages about integration, unity, etc., because it only creates a minuscule exception that covers the vast majority of their offense, and they can't quantify a solvency deficit. But Myanmar inclusion in ASEAN is terrible, which turns their app and makes the solvency gradient flow neg. NC Hunt says that they're incredibly bureaucratic, which hurts unified fronts because they lag behind everyone else on everything. That's proven by Ukraine, which in Ukraine, Myanmar was the only country that didn't want to support Ukraine on every issue. Myanmar destroys ASEAN unity rather than helping it, which kind of turns their solvency deficit and use efficiency framing to evaluate Counterplan solvency. Even if ASEAN is slightly asymptomatic, reaching the threshold to solve their impacts as a binary filter, which we clearly meet. If they cannot coherently explain why excluding Myanmar makes solving the app impossible, vote neg on any risk that this have. Myanmar state collapse causes extinction. Multiple great powers of interest in the region. India, China, and the US mean flashpoint escalation is uniquely likely. That's NAC Corey Boko. That outweighs A magnitude. Multiple great powers in the region means only we have an avenue to extinction. B probability. It's uniquely likely Myanmar because of great power interest. All of their solvency and impact evidence is incredibly generic and just describes regional tensions, but not how great powers get involved or escalate, which means we should be way ahead on the kind of specificity of the scenario, which I'll do more on case. See, Asia war, state collapse of an ASEAN member would obviously annihilate credibility by proving its inability to respond to threats and undermine its signal of great powers, which turns their Asia war scenario. They say perm to the counterplan. The counterplan meets their one function. It does a distinct process and modifies the outcome by explicitly conditioning border entry, which isn't the same as opening it. 2, text. It replaces or requires with necessitates. I know this is a silly argument, but they've dropped it, and it is actually competitive. Textual competition is bad. 1, logic. Premise that words themselves construct policy with no regard to order is illogical and not how real decision makers think. Ignoring syntax, context, etc. is a slippery slope that breaks any standard for competition. 2, word picks that are competitive under the interpretation breaks debate because there are thousands of words in the app and dozens in the plan which are required by the resolution, which is low-class generic debate. 3, solvency. Advocates check. The runaway cheese counterplans don't proliferate because no cards proving their internal net benefit or exist, which caps the risk. Functional competition is the better standard. That means the action taken to the counterplan must differ from the app and that it achieves a result distinct from the app. It most clearly mirrors the real world. Policymakers don't worry about exact text when initially expressing an idea. They look at implementation first and see if the bill is desirable. They say that counterplan fractures unity. Even if this is, I'll answer this probably, but even if this is true to some extent, the uniqueness question is way worse. Myanmar is right now kind of destroying ASEAN credibility. The first part is about how the ASEAN shouldn't pressure Myanmar. That's just thump because ASEAN already is pressuring Myanmar. That's the Hunt 22 evidence on case. ASEAN has been trying to get Myanmar to stop genociding its citizens and stop having a military coup, but Myanmar has been resistant, which is inevitable in the afterworld or the counterplan world. Between some level of disunity is inevitable, but the AF solves because it just kind of gets rid of the root cause of the problem. Myanmar is essentially Myanmar can be rehabilitated, and they haven't made a strong argument for why it can be, which means that you should err for the fact that just kind of cutting them out entirely, even if it causes some disunity, is better than allowing them to kind of slowly poison any ASEAN unity, which are all warrants from the 1NC that they've conceded. They say so group the first 2 cards that answer that. They say illegal migration thumps brain drain. First, restrictive ASEAN immigration prevents Burmese exodus. The plan reverses this trend. Product 12.9. 1.4 million displaced military prevented aid from providing other assistance. Thousands of refugees fled, including Thailand. Often unwelcome Thailand pushed refugees who crossed the border in Malaysia deported 150. First, I'll answer it more properly. 1, no illegal immigration, specifically in Burma. We have 2 separate warrants for that. First, Burma itself is trying to prevent people from getting out of the country. They've banned getting out of the country. They have juntas patrolling the borders. And secondly, Thailand, which is the biggest refugee acceptor, is throwing refugees back because they don't want a ton of Burmese refugees in their countries. Which means even if illegal migration is true, generally it's not true specifically with respect to Myanmar refugees. And the third warrant: Burmese migrant brokers are known to scam citizens across the country. There's a kind of anecdote in one of the cards we read about how there have been spectacles of women being held ransom by brokers, and it's made the Burmese population specifically cautious to leaving the country. That's 1NC frontier. Prefer evidence that's hyper-specific to the nation rather than general evidence that isn't contextual to the Burmese junta. They say brain circulation is not brain drain, even if this is true broadly, because this might be true broadly because it's about migrants who don't want to leave the country to get a better job, but it's not true with respect to Burma. Burma has a population of 5 million. 250,000 refugees went to Thailand alone, which was the frontier evidence, and the card I read in the 2 hour earlier said 1.4 million were displaced. This is a much greater question of scale than their evidence is pricing it. It is an absolutely enormous amount of people because they're fleeing a literal military genocide coup, which kind of should massively outweigh that argument. Counterplan solves the whole case. The only solvency deficits are made up, and the disunity of the status quo is worse than the disunity that the counterplan incurs.
and brain drain not true. Good case. ASEAN is too weak to do anything ever. All of our evidence indicates a great power role. This isn't a question of whether ASEAN grows a little or a lot. It's a question of ASEAN structurally just not being great powers. For their scenario to solve, Thailand would have to come on the same level of geopolitical relevance as the USA and China, which is all of the cards we read in the 1C. The mod evidence says that ASEAN is sidelined amid great power question, a great power competition. These cards use the phrase great power, which kind of suggests that it's just a kind of a structural question. It's not a question of making small progressions. They conceded the TED 22 evidence, which says that China picks apart ASEAN when it wants to, because ASEAN is just worse in scope, as a matter of fact. The multilateral extinction. They've conceded that there's no solvency. How does multilateral stop warming? They just said it's in the card, but they haven't explained solvency when the 1C specifically challenged them to do so in the 1AR. Also, the only extinction impact they've read is warning. Don't let them pull this laundry list nonsense. The 1AR just said warming and Newborn will be pretty bad. But given existential impact, you don't have an explanation for the impact. Don't let the 2AR give you one.
I'm good.
ASEAN strengths all Chinese aggression across Asian wars. China is increasing aggression now. One of the says lack of commitment from the ASEAN is in regional architecture due to perceived weakness that prevents global credibility. Only the Asian solves global Asian war by being a mediator within regional powers, or when I see and impact scenarios entirely conceded. The 2R posturing about the affirmative not being sufficient was one based on evidence not read in the 1 and C. The evidence was skipped, which is the only evidence that talks about ASEAN's question of perception in regards to China, but regards all in descriptive status quo says that China is able to pick apart ASEAN right now because they're not significantly strong on different issues. The counterplan would obviously magnify that. Excluding the Myanmar would be perceived as even more disunity because it means that they're fighting within each other. Trying to exclude the Myanmar from a global, what's it called, ASEAN-wide policy would immediately be perceived as China as weakness and allow them to increase aggression. Only the affirmative is able to solve for an immediate impact. All they're doing are framing about great power wars getting drawn and equally applied to the affirmative, but we solve the net benefit if it is true that the ASEAN unity allows them to mediate conflicts and that would allow us to prevent a Myanmar conflict or drawings, since they can work with regional actors or great powers that would get involved in the first place, which is that if we're able to solve for the internal link outlined in the 1C, then we solve for all the impacts, the multilateral impact, they've conceded the internal link, which means that we don't need to necessarily go for the laundry list of impacts. If we're winning or internal link to China, they say Thailand would have to become the same level of strength as the US. No, it would not. Your internal link evidence is not about deterring the United States. It is about getting other countries or other countries like China, etc., getting involved. If we stop one part of the conflict, then it would equally stop the other. Plus, you have not actually read a piece of evidence that says that the United States is not perceived by the ASEAN and would not listen to them, which means that you should err at and assume that ASEAN would become a global global multilateral leader is successfully able to solve a multitude of different threats. Now, the counterplan, look at the top, the unity deficit was massively mishandled. If you can see that it's a question of perception, not literal Myanmar exclusion. Even if they are correct that Myanmar is bad for unity, they have not made a claim as to why that changes the perception of the of ASEAN and credibility to other countries. Only the one to see backed by evidence says that their lack of commitment to regional architecture prevents them from stopping China or the United States, which means that they're not able to successfully mediate in the status quo. The counterplan would exclude Myanmar and be perceived as a massive infighting that would pick apart different exclusions. R2AC evidence indicate that Myanmar would not show up to different meetings. The counterplan still maintains Myanmar into broader ASEAN structures, just excludes them in the one instance of the plan, which means that they would still be engaged down the line, but the counterplan's exclusion in the context of moving borders would obviously bring up even more ripples down the line and prevent regional infrastructure and economic integration. But lastly, their impact evidence in the 1T says that Myanmar, being bad in terms of credibility, allows the rest of the ASEAN to focus on economic integration, which means that even if it is true that the ASEAN, or that Myanmar at some level is bad for unity, it does not necessarily destroy all of it, because they're still able to focus on economic integration, which is all of our 1C's interlinks to solving your impact, i.e. becoming more regionally integrated between different countries, allows for better economic linkages and being strengthened economically as a global power, which allows them to successfully deter other powers, which means that it's try or die for the affirmative. The questions about quantifying the solvency deficit is irrelevant if we're winning, that there's zero risk that the counterplan would be able to solve for the app, because it never signals to any other country. Their only reason as to why Myanmar would be like worse was an example about Ukraine, which is like entirely irrelevant and not parted, so yeah. Good bit.
Good man.
Yeah.
Fights are over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Peninsula.
the Octafinals of the Harvard Westlake tournament, the decision was a 2-1 for the affirmative. I sat, so I'll go first. I started evaluating this debate on the app page. I think that the 2-and-R defense kind of is, I ended up voting on Counterplan because I think it solves most of the case, even though I ended up thinking that there was like a somewhat high risk of the app because I think the 2-and-R analysis on this page just like wasn't as good as the stuff the 2-AR was doing, and I think stuff the 2-AR was doing more contextualist China stuff that the 2-and-R wasn't very good on. But I do end up thinking that this unity deficit doesn't really make that much sense to me, which then makes me think that there's fairly high risk of the net benefit and fairly high risk of the Counterplan solve the case page. So I think the Counterplan is able to solve most of the app. The 2-AR starts on this Counterplan with like this unity deficit and says it's a question of like perception, not exclusion. But I don't think the 2-and-R is really making an argument that's just like, oh, like, you know, they just exclude Myanmar, which is bad. I think the 2-and-R is doing fairly good analysis about why excluding Myanmar would actively be good because it's already kind of being a bozo, like sort of disrupting the unity stuff, and it seems like it would sort of like complicate this unity stuff to me. This next argument about like this massive, like not able to mediate in status quo doesn't really make that much sense to me since the Counterplan is not status quo. I think maybe if this argument was better explained, maybe I'd vote on it, but given what I had on my flow, not feel comfortable explaining this in the negative, like I don't really know what you're saying. Next, I'm sort of confused about how it would sort of bring more ripples down the line, considering the 2-and-R is winning arguments about how it's good for them to slowly cut out Myanmar, and the 2-AR, I think, sort of concedes that it's bad for Myanmar to be part of the organization. Next, the app says that Myanmar being bad wouldn't destroy it, but I think that at best this is just weak defense and not super relevant since the 2-and-R seems sort of right that it is better to cut them out with the stuff above, and especially since I think there's a risk of the net benefit, the 2-and-R doesn't really need to win that, and that it like completely destroys the organization, just that it's like destroyed enough for the sort of impacts to happen. But yeah, I think my biggest problem with the 2-AR is that it seems like it's just brushing over this 2-and-R analysis about why Myanmar is bad. Like your only response to it was like the stuff about how the 2-and-R only talks about Ukraine, but I do not think the 2-and-R only talks about Ukraine. It seems like there's a fairly good extension of this 1NC card that sort of like gives examples about how like Myanmar is like currently disrupting the situation, which seems sufficient to me to say that like disunity is sort of like happening because of Myanmar. So yes.
I voted AF, the unity deficit, high risk of it, and the AF definitively solves the net benefit. Myanmar's exclusion from the plan messes with integration and market dynamic centrality stuff that all AF internal link evidence is about. I think it causes wars in Asia, erodes multilat. The short version is, I think the AF is at the second line. I don't really think the 2-and-R explanation is great, like beyond this Ukraine stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. The 2-AR does miss the boat there, but getting there. It doesn't really matter if Myanmar thinks the invasion was justified or is generally bad for unity if the AF wins that their exclusion is perceived as splitting ASEAN apart. It's pretty intuitive. I think they have pretty massive impact to it that the plan could solve. It's kind of tough to just be like they made up all of these deficits when I think they make a lot of sense, at least to me. They have carded evidence supporting it in the 1AC and the 2AC. The 1AR, and I think the explanation is pretty good. AF solves the net benefit. The net's impacts about large-scale interventions from China and India. AF prevents them from getting drawn in by integrating ASEAN. This is consistent with the way the 2-and-R is explaining their impact, so I think the plan solves a good chunk of this DA. US doesn't get drawn in if ASEAN integration is secured. This was the 1AR on the case page. And I also don't think the DA can turn the case because I'm not sure why Myanmar's inclusion over the AF's open border policy specifically causes fracturing or disunity or anything really the 2-and-R says. The DA by itself is like kind of large otherwise, and I think the AF should think about extending some defense to the internal link, maybe some brain drain stuff. I didn't think the 2-and-R was amazing there. But getting every country involved is key. And it's just kind of tough when DA impact isn't really external and the centrality advantage captures enough of it. So if I think there's a high risk of the deficit, I'm AF. Other things, I don't think the counterplan competes textually just by substituting one word for another unless that substitution affects the net benefit. Obviously not relevant, you would win that textual competition is bad, but just something to throw out. I'm also fairly certain the 1NC read this Chinese maritime revisionism term, and I'm also pretty certain that the 1AR dropped it.
Largely the same. The exclusion of Myanmar creates a perception deficit in which ASEAN is not seen. as globally credible because of its lack of commitment to the regional architecture of Southeast Asia. I read this deficit evidence in the 1AR, it's only pertinent to the credibility of Myanmar among ASEAN states, not global powers, and the 2AR points out that net benefit is not unique because Myanmar will stay disengaged in affairs by like avoiding meetings. The question shifts to one of economic reintegration that can only occur with the perception of unity. And the 2AR also makes the argument that Myanmar is going to do whatever it does regardless of whether it's included in ASEAN, and including and excluding is not going to matter. So it's like try that for a perceived unity that at least raises some global powers to the prospect of multilateralism.
So I guess based on what you were saying, you thought maritime revision is a better 2AR?
Well,
Or
did
like
they
the
answer it?
Well, I thought they said that like ASEAN solves.
Maybe.
Okay.
Not in any meaningful way.
In terms of the solvency deficit argument and whether or not the captain did solve the affirmative, do you think the better way to or a better way to articulate it would it be that artificially excluding Myanmar absent a broader, absent using the ASEAN process itself? So there's other ways that Myanmar could be excluded. For example, ASEAN could do their own regional process, could exclude it, but excluding it in individual policies would be bad in terms of broader unity, absent using that sort of regional framework. Would that be a better way to phrase that so the captain didn't solve the app as much in terms of the solvency deficit, or was there a better way?
Yeah, I think that would make sense. Would you need to win that like Myanmar is currently being excluded through their procedures though? Or?
Okay. Okay.
Well, like, would you, if you made that argument, would you need to win that Myanmar is like currently being included
Well,
through their procedures? Because you need to, because like I think the counterplan is sort of talking like about how like, Myanmar is being like should be like slowly excluded, right? And like
Okay, that's
the counterplan like sort of talking about something. You could like say that like other measures could